The king will return. There's a story, or a cycle of stories, that has captured the Western imagination for at least the last 1500 years. It keeps reappearing in literature and cinema and TV through various iterations. They're like musical variations on a theme. I'm talking, of course, about the Arthurian legends. The first literary references to Arthur go back to the 7th century CE Welsh poem entitled, and I'm sure I'm going to really mess this up, Y Gododdin. It's attributed to the bard Aneirin, in which the warrior Gwadur, which of course I guess becomes Arthur, is praised for his prowess. There are other Welsh references in the 9th and 10th centuries CE, and the tales become increasingly fantastical and infused with magical elements. Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britannia, written around 1136, is the first work that really establishes Arthur as a king, a central figure in a legendary narrative that blends history, myth and folklore. Geoffrey's account is heavily romanticised and is the foundation for many of the later Arthurian legends. The French poet Chrétien de Troyes in the 12th century wrote a series of romances that further expanded upon the Arthurian legend, introducing elements like the Holy Grail, Lancelot and Camelot, shaping the story into the form that we generally recognise today. Was there an historical Arthur? Possibly. If so, though, Arthur was probably based on a military leader, a Dux Bellorum, who fought against the invading Saxons in Britain after the fall of the Roman Empire around the 5th or 6th century. Obviously, though, there's no historical basis for any of the stories that we're familiar with. What are the central elements of this story cycle, and what makes them so appealing to generation after generation? The first element is the story of Arthur's birth and his early life. Arthur is supposedly conceived through the magical intervention of Merlin, who helps King Uther Pendragon disguise himself as Gorlois, Duke of Cornwall, in order to sleep with Gorlois' wife Igraine. Arthur is born of this union, so there's both a magical and a deceptive element to this birth story, and this already points to the fact that Arthur is in some way tainted from birth. He is born of deception. Merlin, a powerful wizard, plays a major role in the birth of Arthur, and he also helps to guide Uther Pendragon and later takes responsibility for the young Arthur. Arthur is raised in secret by Sir Hector. So alongside the stain on Arthur's conception, there's also this element of destiny. Arthur becomes the hidden secret heir to Uther's throne. And he becomes king either by pulling the sword Excalibur from a stone, as in many of the stories, or else Merlin gives Arthur Excalibur, which is bestowed by the Lady of the Lake. Either way, this establishes his right to rule Britain. Note that even though we're only part way into this story, it's already clear that none of these characters are simply good or evil. They're all flawed with mixed motives, and I think this is something that gives them depth and makes this such a rich theme to draw upon even today. Most of the characters at one time or another have been portrayed either as a hero or as a villain. The second element, of course, is Arthur's actual kingship. As I mentioned, he becomes king of Britain after pulling the sword from the stone or after being given Excalibur. He establishes his kingdom, typically with his capital at Camelot. He's portrayed as a just and noble king who unites all the warring factions of Britain, and he becomes a kind of model or symbol for good kingship. And this is also one reason for the endurance of these stories. In fact, a recurring theme is that Arthur is not truly dead, but will one day return to restore Britain. This belief reflects the hope for a future golden age of peace and justice. We see this in the title of T.H. White's classic collection of stories, The Once and Future King. So Arthur will come again and restore peace and justice. And of course, Camelot becomes a symbol for the perfect royal court and by extension, the perfect society, an idea co-opted by the Kennedy mythology last century. The third element is the Knights of the Round Table, which also provides a rich source for other stories. They represent such a diverse bunch of characters, each with their strengths and flaws. There's scope for all kinds of intrigue and drama. And the Round Table itself becomes a symbol of equality, brotherhood, unity, fairness and camaraderie. The fourth element is the whole quest for the Holy Grail, which I won't go into here, except to say that it links this cycle of magical stories with this Christian legend. The fifth element is the Arthur, Guinevere, Lancelot cycle, where that inner taint and corruption begins to reveal itself. It's interesting that beneath all of this symbolism and perfection, Arthur as the perfect king, Camelot as the perfect court, the Round Table as a symbol of fellowship and equality, beneath all of this there runs this deep flaw. Arthur is corrupted from the very beginning because of the deception involved in his conception. Again, this is surely why this story continues to resonate. It has a kind of Greek tragedy element. The story is a very deep well. The sixth element concerns Mordred and the fall of Arthur. Mordred is often depicted as Arthur's illegitimate son, and sometimes he's Arthur's son with Arthur's own half-sister, Morgause or Morgan Le Fay. Here again we observe this deep flaw. At best, Arthur has been unfaithful. At worst, he's committed incest. How could this not make for a great story? And Morgan Le Fay, possibly Arthur's half-sister, is another fascinating character. She too has been depicted at various times as a hero or as a villain. She's also often the only one who can take on Merlin. Ultimately, Mordred betrays Arthur. While Arthur's away fighting in Europe, Mordred seizes the throne of Britain. Then Arthur returns to Britain to reclaim his throne, leading to the final battle at Camlan. And during the battle, Arthur kills Mordred, his own son, but is mortally wounded himself in the process. And so, the inevitable Greek tragedy continues to unfold. Finally, there's Arthur's death. He's taken to the mystical Isle of Avalon, either to die or to be healed. Again, according to legend, Arthur doesn't die, but waits to return in Britain's time of greatest need. Excalibur is returned to the Lady of the Lake, and the cycle is completed. What an amazing story this is, and what a brilliant example of how such a story can grow and develop over the centuries. It continues to develop today, whether we see it in Monty Python or in one of the latest series on Netflix. People continue to plumb the depths of this story, to develop the characters, sometimes side characters, and to explore their depth and complexity. I've now read and seen so many books, movies and TV shows that draw on this legend that I'm no longer always sure which are parts of the original stories and which are not. Original in the sense of going back to the first complete written texts of the 12th century. And nor does this really matter, because it's the nature of this story to keep on evolving. I find the moral ambiguity of the story particularly intriguing. Here is the perfect king, this model for all kings, for whose return some people have longed, at least symbolically, as in the Kennedy Camelot construct. Yet this person, Arthur, is deeply flawed from the very beginning, perhaps like Kennedy, by virtue of the deceit that surrounds his conception and birth. This flaw rumbles beneath the surface, tragically erupting from time to time. It's not actually Arthur's fault. He can't help his birth, but it taints everything. Yet still he and his court and his kingdom become a symbol for perfection. There's a deep paradox here, I think, that doesn't shy away from the ambiguities of life, from the ambiguities of good and evil, which is why various characters can switch between different versions of the story from hero to villain and back again. These are themes that run deep in Greek tragedy too. The paradox is perhaps that perfection needs this element of imperfection to be truly perfect. Don't think too hard about that, just let it zen you.